Hi, I'm Pastor Kurt, and this is your 5-minute Bible study. Today, we're going to look at Acts chapter 6 and 7. These two chapters are the story of Stephen. Now, who's Stephen? We haven't heard about him before. His story begins and ends in all of 2 chapters, right? This is all we get about the life of Stephen. We get introduced to Stephen earlier at the end of chapter 5, because we're told that there are some Greek women who aren't receiving kind of the daily food distribution, and they need some help. They need people to make sure that they get food. Well, the apostles then appoint 7 people to make sure that these women get food. Stephen is one of them. Now, Stephen helps make sure these women get food, and we're told that he ends up doing these great wonders. That God is clearly at work in Stephen's life, doing these amazing things. And Stephen catches the attention of people. And Stephen starts doing what Peter and John have been doing. He's helping people and he's telling them about Jesus. And like how the powers that be treated Peter and John, now they're treating Stephen in the same way. Kind of saying, why are you telling people about Jesus? Shut up. Well, again, just like Peter and John, Stephen won't shut up. Stephen continues to tell people about Jesus. The bulk of these 2 chapters is Stephen's speech to the powers that be for why he's doing what he's doing. Now, when you read this speech, a lot of it is Stephen telling the people their own history. He tells them about Abraham and Joseph and Moses and the events out in the wilderness. It's kind of like a summary of the highlights of the Old Testament for us. He retells them their own history. And at the end of his speech, he kind of says, throughout your history, your people didn't always do a good job of listening to God. Some people listened to God, yes, of course, but some people didn't. And God remained faithful to your people. God continued to help your people. That's what God is doing now. But some of you still aren't listening. God was at work in Jesus, but like your ancestors, some of you here today aren't listening to what's going on. Well, that got Stephen into even more trouble, and they ended up stoning him to death. In the scene when he's stoned to death, Stephen basically says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit, right? He says to God, receive my spirit. As I mentioned in a previous video, there's a lot of parallels in the book of Acts and the Gospel of Luke. Here's another one. Stephen's death is meant to echo Jesus' death. He basically says the same line that Jesus does on the cross, which is supposed to tell us as readers, hey, this is similar, notice this. But think about Stephen's speech again. He doesn't lay out some kind of logical argument for why they should believe in Jesus. He retells them their own history. He retells them their own story. And in so doing, he basically says that history is repeating itself here. Your ancestors didn't always listen to God, and you all aren't listening to God. You need to learn from your history. For us Christians today, we can learn from our history too. Because all those Old Testament stories, that's part of our history as well. And when we read the Bible, we see a lot of cases of when people don't listen to God. But there are some people who do. But a lot of times people don't. And yet God remains faithful. God continues to try to show us God's love, even when we aren't listening, even when we don't want to listen, even when we want to do our own thing. God remains faithful to us. Thanks be to God. Sometimes we do listen, though. And this is what Stephen was trying to get those people to do. He's like, learn from your own history. God is doing something remarkable and new and amazing in this moment. So don't be like your ancestors who weren't paying attention. Instead, learn something new and pay attention to the new thing that God is doing. When we look at our world, we can see that God is doing a new thing. Sometimes it's hard to see, I know. But God is still at work, and God is still faithful to us, just like God was faithful to all of our ancestors all those years ago. God is still faithful to us. And so today, we can kind of learn from their mistakes, and instead of not listening to God, we can choose to listen to God and try to pay attention to the new thing that God is doing now. There's your 5-minute Bible study. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.